We found 3 guests.
That's right.
Bruce, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Oh, okay. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Grace Notes with Yorktown Supervisor Michael Grace. I'm Bruce Apart, your host of Chase Media Group, and as with every Grace Notes, we just like to start off letting you know about some of the upcoming events in and around Yorktown, and of course, now weekends in the summer in Yorktown are even more busy than they have been because in addition to the farmers market, Supervisor, every Saturday behind the firehouse, now on Sundays, we have the flea market, right? Every Sunday in the same location behind the firehouse. So if you're looking for things to buy, either on Saturday or Sunday, there are now a lot of places to go. And T-Town has a lot of events coming up in August. It says you can go to the community calendar at yorktownny.org. That's what I'm looking at. So you can see the same thing that we're seeing. But T-Town has a lot of events coming up in August on the weekends. You can just check that out on their website. On Saturday, August 4th, Support Connection has a home run derby, borrowing a page from Major League Baseball, at the Peekskill Stadium. It's part of Peekskill Celebration, which you also should check out because we don't only report on Yorktown, but on our neighbors, our good neighbors like Peekskill, Cortland, Somers. Then, of course, the ongoing, very successful Lions Club Sunday concerts, and I heard the Bee Gee tribute was supposed to be a real smash hit. Everybody was saying.
It was two in a row that went inside.
Right, I know, because of the weather. Yeah, yeah. And then coming up on August 12th is Alter Ego, which is tunes from the 60s and, you know, the era that all of us remember very fondly. So you might want to check that out, too. So, Supervisor, this is sort of a special edition of your show, Grace Notes. We have members of the local media here, and we want to first introduce them at the far end of the table. To your left, watching, is Robert Marchant of the Journal News and also of Aloha.com. Welcome, Rob. And sitting next to Robert is Mike Daly of the Northern Westchester Examiner. Thanks for being here, Mike. Thank you. And then right here is Brian Fumagalli of the Yorktown News. So thanks, Brian, for being here. And of course, Supervisor, you just issued what is really a position paper, your analysis of the DPW referendum.
Right. For people out there, we're here on a Friday afternoon instead of a Wednesday evening. I'm going to apologize. I got a bit of a head cold, but going in and out of air conditioning for the last week, I guess. But one of the things, obviously, is one of the hotter topics, so to speak, in town at this point is the DPW issue and the DPW formation. And on July 25th, we had a work session devoted specifically towards that. And, you know, I believe that at least I think that I owe people of the town of Yorktown an explanation as to where I stand. Now, having sat through I'm going to lose my informational meeting. So we issued a press release. It's kind of lengthy, but it's an analysis essentially of what I think I heard and coming out of that July 25th work session. And I've tried to just very methodically going through issue by issue because I think that what needs to be done in particular to this issue. So the idea was, well, do I do a press release? And I think what came to mind at this point was why not we have the press here on the show so they can both look. We've given them advanced copies. They can look it over and then obviously open it up to you guys to either ask me questions specifically about this or anything else in the town of Yorktown. And I think we do this a little bit more often and get you guys over here. And on that note, I'd love to hear a little bio snippets from put you guys on the line instead of being interviewed, being the interviewer, be the interviewee.
Maybe first you should just summarize your conclusion so everybody understands where, you know.
Yeah, well, let's into it. So, you know, we were all here on July 25th, and the town board, I think, notwithstanding that some of the pre-meeting criticism was that we had made up our minds, nothing could be further from the truth. I think we were absolutely extremely curious as to what we were going to hear from the people that are proponents of creating a DPW. I know we had set the room up. They wanted a PowerPoint, ability to do a PowerPoint presentation, et cetera, et cetera. I think the town board was a little underwhelmed in regard to the information they got from the DPW.
From the
Of citizens for the DPW. And most of the presentation was just an invitation to go to their website or to them personally to get the information on what they propose as a DPW. So essentially, in my analysis, I went back to take to their documents to see what it is that they were looking to do. And essentially, this is the press release in which you all have, but I'll try to run it down and then ask you questions if you want to interrupt me like I do at some board meetings for people that do talk and ask a question as I go along. Please feel free to do so at any time, because I'd like to have this as an open discussion, and you know, don't be shy about your questions. Essentially, the proposal from the Citizens for a DPW was to create a DPW with a commissioner and a deputy commissioner. That commissioner, it was proposed to be someone that was a professional, preferably a professional engineer, which would make sense. If you're going to have a DPW, you probably have someone, a civil engineer heading it, or someone having qualifications akin to that, whether it be life experience or actual degrees, pedigree of a professional engineer. Then there would be a deputy commissioner, and that department would then be, that would be the head of the DPW, and then they had flow charts of different divisions under the DPW in two scenarios. Essentially, one would be highways, the highway department, buildings, maintenance, and then parks and rec, or recreation or parks, and then the last division would be a central garage division. The second option would include within that DPW both sewer and water. So that was essentially the framework in which they proposed. Just so it's clear, at this point, all those departments are separate within the town. You have Highway Department, Parks and Recs Department, Department of Environmental Conservation, sewer and water. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. They historically have evolved that way, essentially because a lot of these things don't overlap. Water Department deals with the water districts, which not everybody's included. If you have a well, you're not within the water district. Sewer department includes the sewer districts, and if you don't have a sewer, you have a septic, you're probably not in the sewer district, although you may be, but not hooked up. But essentially, those are separate or subsets of the total town. Park and Recs is a town-wide department, as is Highway Department. So part of the DPW issue, even in creating it or managing it or in its function, would have to do an accounting between the special improvement districts, would be those things that are chargeable back to the general fund and those things that would be chargeable to the special improvement districts. Nonetheless, the people for the DPW had suggested certain savings, and at the beginning of the meeting, in their presentation, one of the things I tried to caution, I think some people thought I may have been a little rude to Mr. Bach, and it wasn't the point of being rude. It was a point of, in the presentation, which I didn't know what the presentation was going to be, so I was expecting some real hard facts and figures as to what was going to go on. And one of the things I think that needed clarification in discussing the issue is what savings can be achieved essentially with the that can only be achieved with the DPW, and what savings can be achieved outside of DPW, and more importantly, what savings can be achieved by no longer having an elected highway superintendent as opposed to having an appointed highway superintendent. And they provide, I think it was 8 total categories, one which would show the additional salaries for the DPW commissioner and deputy DPW commissioner, and then the savings that could be, they thought could be achieved. And off the top of my head, some of them included getting rid of the, I'm not in any particular order, but one was getting rid of the sewer inspector, which is a job that's held by someone within the engineering department. And we heard from our acting town engineer, which is an outside consultant at this point, that that task would have to be performed nonetheless, and it certainly is not something that is dependent upon a DPW or non-DPW. And that was $90,000 of their savings. And we couldn't necessarily just fire that person because we'd have post-termination liability, so that only could be done probably through attrition over time, but essentially the duties of that person would have to be filled by somebody. The other savings was to eliminate, I think, a managerial position in Parks and Recreation. We heard from Brian Gray, and I think that it was fairly understood after his presentation That's a department that is probably undermanned at this point. So it doesn't seem realistic that that would be a savings as well. We went through the outside electrical contracting work as opposed to having somebody in-house. That savings would not be appreciated under a DPW, non-DPW, because that could be done anyhow. And historically, the town has found that it's more savings to go outside for electrical work because a lot of it is beyond what you could have as a laborer/electrician within the town. And there's certain things that they can do, change light bulbs, maybe change outlets, but you get to certain things that electrician's going to have to be necessary anyhow. We heard from the outside electrical contractor, most of the money that is spent on an annual basis, actually 37% of it is just in materials, not in labor. So there becomes an issue there. So that savings, whether it exists, it doesn't exist, I think the town historically decided that it was a savings to do it the way it is, and that would not be, wouldn't change under the DPW arrangement. The next thing was in the Department of Environmental Conservation, and the point there is that that was Kim Gage who gave the presentation, and she was absolutely impressive. And what I think is very important for the town of Yorktown to understand is what these department heads do and the scope of their tasks. And if you listen to Kim Gage, it's quite formidable what she does. That department has already lost a managerial position. It used to be headed by Pat LaFaro, and Kim Gage took over the duties of Pat LaFaro, and some of those other duties that Pat LaFaro had been distributed to other management positions, lower management positions in building. The last administration, I think through the suggestion of the last supervisor, was looking to appoint David Rambo as a department head to DEC while he was acting water superintendent as well. That was never implemented, and it was never implemented essentially because, in my opinion, it created a no-show department head in a department that is very busy and needs a lot of day-to-day management. And it also would dilute his ability to, tasks that he had to perform for the water district, which are formidable at this point. And one of the things that we're looking at, there's a meter project, which is a whole other story. But the execution management of that meter replacement project has become problematic, and so he's got his hands full. And I couldn't imagine him now splitting his time between doing what Kim's doing at DEC and trying to do it as a water. He's going to be a no-show at one department or the other. And if we think it's necessary to have someone in charge of water, which it is, that person shouldn't then be diluted by trying to manage a department that he's not going to be physically at. Or in other words, he can't physically be two locations at the same time. Kim stepped up to the plate and has done an incredible job. And the things that she couldn't do are being taken over by our people in the buildings, that they're basically laborers, mechanics that are assigned to every building, and they've picked up the slack that Pat LaFaro used to do. So the DPW is not going to cause the elimination of any managerial positions in DEC. The long and short of it is that I think when we come down to it, you do the final analysis, there really isn't any a real appreciable cost savings associated with the DPW. My analysis would point to the fact that the DPW would actually cost the town several hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. In the short term, in rearranging the present managerial structure of the town may cause you to have some short-term termination liabilities, or et cetera, unemployment, et cetera thing. But even though that aside, I think in the long term, you're going to end up having a significant increase in managerial costs for the operational functions of the town. And so with that said, and what I do point out in my press release, if the town were to begin to make investments in what I call the more visionary aspects of town government, you have the operational aspects and you have the long-term planning aspects of town, where you would have an engineer on staff. If the town were to make a commitment to that type of professional staffing, which I think is very lacking in the town, has been decimated over the years, then DPW may make sense. But under the present structure and personnel, the DPW doesn't make sense. Or I shouldn't say it doesn't make sense. It's going to be, the town has to be willing to make a substantial investment of high salaries. And in that regard, one of the things that is on a side and collateral to it, but it has to be remarked upon, is that if you look at an engineer, you look at an engineer's salary, you look at $140,000, maybe $150,000 a year, maybe on the low end $130,000, but you're looking at some number in that for an engineer and a commissioner for DPW, and a deputy commissioner's salary that's going to be fairly close to that. And the remarkable part about that is that would then become the highest paid managerial positions in the town. And we put in my memo what the other managerial positions in the town are being paid. As for instance, supervisor salary I think is 112 and change. The controller's 110. A lot of the department heads vary from 80 to 80, 90, $70,000. So all of a sudden, I'm creating two managerial positions that are getting paid tens of thousands of dollars more than any other department head. And one of the consequences that we have to be aware of, or any management of any kind of corporation, whether it be public or private, has to be aware of, without having some parity in salaries for upper management, you're going to have some functionality problems. So that creates an upward pressure on salaries. I think if you sat through the meeting on the 25th and you listen to our department heads are doing an amazing amount of work. And any Yorktown are listening to it should be extremely proud of the workforce, the dedication that these people have, and more so based upon what the level of compensation is. But you're really going to change the upper level compensation schedule by bringing in a DPW and a commissioner and assistant DPW commissioner. You're going to have two people that are going to be paid significantly more than anybody else that's doing anything managerial work within the town, and that's going to present a problem. So you have to be cognizant of that, I think.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
You made mention that you thought it'd be $150,000 a year. Where did you get those numbers?
Well, the numbers I looked at what I based it upon what the DPW people provided. I think they provided a base salary of $140,000 for an engineer. They didn't provide the salary for the deputy commissioner. But that was commissioner's salary would be $140,000. The deputy commissioner, they said, would add another $39,000, and that would be based upon removing some of the managerial duties from DEC and collapsing it into the deputy commissioner's scope of work. Problem with that is if anybody, the DEC had two managerial positions. There's already one of them has disappeared. That was Pat LaFaro. Those duties have already collapsed into the present DEC department head. To the degree that the deputy commissioner or commissioner of the DEC may be able to pick that up, it would have to be worked out and seen. But the bottom line is, I think, for the sake of being conservative in terms of presenting this to the public, you have to basically operate under the assumption that you're looking at two high salaried positions in the creation of the DPW.
And the presentations made by your department heads, several of them remarked as they looked at the proposed reorganization, as the Citizens for DPW proposed, looked at the organizational charts and essentially said, I look at this chart and I'm not on here. Do you have your post-analysis of that?
Yeah.
Do you feel that that was a legitimate reaction on the part of the department heads?
Well, it's funny. Let me preface it by saying that the department head, what you heard from our department heads was remarkable as to what they do. You would have to make a decision if you wanted to provide a savings, so to speak, of eliminating some of those people, because and the problem with that is you don't know to what degree or who that's going to be, because you haven't kind of thought out the scope of what the commissioner or deputy commissioner is going to be doing. Because the one thing that the deputy commissioner or commissioner is going to be doing, as a given, is going to be running the highway department and doing the heavy machinery and because you're certainly going to be eliminating the highway superintendent as a position. So that those duties of the highway superintendent are going to be subsumed into the commissioner or deputy commissioner. As to what else they're going to be able to do once they've subsumed those duties would remain to be seen. I think that essentially what you'd end up having is you'd find out that based upon our present staffing levels, that I mean, the town of Yorktown could use on staff extra additional professionals, but that's an investment of money. That's not the savings. As I pointed out in here, a lot of what the DPW's literature is based upon is a 1995 study, I think, authored by Renee Fogarty. And in 1995, the town was a completely different. It had a completely different structure. You had a town engineer, you had an assistant town engineer, you had an outside consulting engineer, which was essentially what we have now is just the outside consulting engineer, and that was for essentially sewer issues, because that was a big, major issue, still remains a major issue in the town, because we had a $40 million upgrade on the plant. You have a plant that has all sorts of different compliance issues. We have people that the DEP pays for that operate within the sewer department, in the sewer plant. So even at that time, you needed, the engineering department was so overworked that you needed an outside consultant. So you had two engineers, an outside consulting engineer, you had a planner and an assistant planner. And over time, based on attrition, those positions have never been filled. If you had that managerial configuration today, I think you could make a very strong case why you should have a DPW. And the reason being is because you're going to get a return on your investment in the engineering services by putting them both in charge of operational issues and future planning issues.
So I gather you consider the idea of hiring a town engineer a possibility further down the line. When did that position go away?
I can't tell you exactly. The last acting town engineer was Dan Ciarcia, and when he left, I'd be venturing a guess, but it probably was a little bit after '95. If that was Bach's administration, I think I know he was here during Cooper's administration. So sometime within Cooper's administration, he left. There was also Jeff Econom, who was an assistant town engineer at the time.
And now it's on a consulting basis?
If you go, the engineering department in the town of Yorktown has been completely decimated. So if you go, there's a lot of comparisons with other communities. One other community is Cortland. Cortland got rid of its highway superintendent as an elected position and has a department of environmental facilities or whatever it is called. They have 5 PEs on staff, and essentially. And the thing is, but most towns operate and have committed to the investment in a town engineer. Town of Yorktown, and I question the wisdom of it, but it's the managerial framework that I inherited. And I really do question the wisdom of it. I think the town is not well served by not having an engineer on staff for a lot of different reasons.
What would be the trigger that would lead you to begin that process to hire a town engineer?
Oh, I think it's something that has to be looked at. I mean, what's interesting about the debate on the DPW, I think it sheds light on some of these issues, which I think really need to have some discussion. And the hiring of a town engineer is one of them. As for instance, over this last several months, when I started off, there's certain initiatives that my administration is pushing. One of them was the revitalization of the 202 corridor, and another one is the relocation of and reclamation of the land that now sits, that the highway garage now occupies. Those are much longer term initiatives, but they need planning. They need engineering services. They need engineering services, and we have some very innovative ideas in terms of that. In terms of relocating the highway garage, we think we can do it at the sewer plant property. And the exciting thing about that is not only do we take an operation and put it on a property that has marginal value and reclaim a piece of property that has substantial value, but to do a state-of-the-art, very environmental friendly facility up there, which would run on, in part, either the methane collected from the sewer digesters or be heated by the compost piles, which give us an enormous amount of heat. So we could actually engineer a building that runs on its own. And so it's a very exciting talk about green project that could happen with the state-of-the-art highway facility up at the Greenwood in conjunction with the facility at the sewer plant facility. But these things need, I don't have, I don't have a planning staff or an engineering staff available to me to kind of push these things along. So, at this point in time, that's what's been bogged down in trying to find that. Now, I've been working on the outside with engineers that have been basically volunteering their time and their skill to me, such as the old town engineer, Dan Ciarci, because he happens to be a tenant in my building. But we're talking about it, so we're moving it along. But the thing is, it's eventually you're going to get to a point where you need that on staff. Now, whether that staff is by hiring outside consultants or that staff is by being on staff to the town, is a decision that the town should make. And I think that a lot, because I look at the two aspects of town government being operational, day-to-day operational aspects of the town, and the long-term planning of the town. And the long-term planning of the town really requires that type of expertise. I give you another, for instance. Town spent, I don't know, maybe over $1 million in its last comprehensive plan. 1989, that plan was done by volunteers. And the last plan just tweaked it a little bit. It didn't do much to change what the real substance was of the 89 plan. But it cost them over $1 million. And the thing is that and essentially because we went to a lot of town went to a lot of outside consultants on it, didn't get it quite right, got sued on it, went back and forth, et cetera, et cetera. The thing is that there's been, I think, because of the tough economic times that we've all found ourselves in, there's been a really concerted effort to say, we are going to remove all the, sort of the long-term planning professionals and just keep our operational professionals on staff. So you have, that's the advent of the escrow fees. What we do now in terms of planning is we do it on a per capita basis. You come in with a plan, and we'll take an escrow fee, and we'll go hire an engineer to look at your plan. What we're losing in that is regional development or regional planning. So 202 is another good example, stormwater and stormwater planning and what you have to do for stormwater, the new regulations. You need a regional approach to it. You can't do it on a development by development, a lot by lot basis, because you're losing the ability to do it correctly, number one, and you're losing the ability to get funding. In a meeting just this morning with people looking for actual funding of grant money that is available to the towns in order to do these types of, 202, the 202 project would fit within these funding criteria very well. The problem is, if it's just conceptual and not more than conceptual, doesn't have you don't have a four corners of a plan, you lose the opportunity for that funding.
You think the town is ill-served, or it's not getting the best possible outcomes by not having an in-house engineering staff?
Right. And I think if
that's a problem for another day, I guess is what you're saying.
Well, the reason why I bring it up within the context of the debate of the DPW is because the thing is, if the town would, that's the type of investment the town has to make. If you make that kind of investment in staff, then you start to build, now you have on staff maybe the framework for a DPW, because for instance, if we had the structure we had in 1995, you may have a DPW may provide you with true savings. Based upon the framework that we have in 2012, all you're going to do is add the expense of the things, the professionals that we don't have within the context of a DPW.
So the bottom line is that the pro DPW group, they have their numbers.
Right.
As we know. And you counter that little analysis and with your numbers.
Right.
And they say, okay, Michael, you might not agree with us, but we feel we've done our due diligence in getting these numbers. Why don't you let the people of Yorktown decide by putting it on the ballot? And you come back and say, well, you said to me before that you have a responsibility to the people of Yorktown, and if you don't feel that if you feel this might hurt the town, or that the people in the town aren't educated on it right now, one way or the other, it's irresponsible to then have them vote on something. And do you have that? Do I have that correct?
Yeah, essentially, I think when you look at the numbers, you can say, look, I have my numbers, they have their numbers, and you can say we can have this debate until the cows come home. I think the bottom line is that I think if you're going to approach it in order to put it out for referendum, you have to be conservative in your analysis. And by being conservative, is really state what the, what probably is, if it's a financially driven initiative.
Do you believe it is?
Well, that's what it's been presented as. So, so if you're going to present it as a financially driven initiative, then I think you have to be conservative about your numbers.
If it wasn't financially, what would it be?
Well, I think I think it is a matter of control, of whether or not you have a. So we get into this issue. Then, if I put the financial issues aside, which I think if you want to be honest about it, it's either neutral or it's going to cost money, because that's really the conservative position that you should take and do it if it's financially driven. Next issue becomes control, and is the town better served by an appointed highway superintendent or one that is elected? And I think there's cogent arguments to be made on either side of that issue. I think, for one, that what Yorktowners do lose is that independent voice. As for instance, if he becomes a department head, then that department head is having to goose step behind whatever the board decides, and it's not a independently elected highway superintendent has an independent voice, and can express his opinions as to the allocation of resources, financial resources, into whether they go into his vital infrastructure or somewhere else, and he can do it without the fear of reprisal, of not being a good soldier and following what the wishes of the town board are.
And just so people know, is that you could put this on the ballot if you wanted to, and they could vote to have the position appointed, but that doesn't mean there'd be a DPW.
Right.
Two different things.
Two different things.
And so I think it's confusing, I think, to us when we first get into it, and then we talk to you guys every day, so we have a better idea of what's going on, but especially to people, watching or regular Yorktown residents, is that they're really two separate things that can be connected, but the ballot initiative correct me if I'm wrong, has nothing to do with the DPW, at least officially.
At this point, I think look, you guys are reporters, and like you say, you talk to everybody, you talk to the side of the DPW, you talk to the staff, you talk to departments, you talk to me, you talk to elected officials. The problem that you're having in defining what the issue is the problem that I'm having in putting it out for referendum. Essentially, it's been ill-defined, and if it's being driven by the idea that this is an initiative that's going to save the town $250,000, and what's getting in the way of the town saving $250,000 a year is having an elected highway superintendent, and that's the way you're framing an issue, and that's the way you wanted to go, and that's been the campaign at this point by Citizens for DPW, isn't what you're saying, isn't separating out what can be done without a DPW, what can be done with the DPW, what's the difference between a DPW with an appointed or an elected highway superintendent. Those lines haven't been clearly drawn. What the campaign has been, we want to get rid of the highway superintendent as an elected position, because that facilitates us creating a DPW, because we can't bring the highway department under the DPW, then the DPW is not going to function, or won't function as effectively as it could if we had highway under there, whatever it is, and that would provide us with a savings of $250,000 a year. And then out of that translation basically becomes a referendum of whether we save Yorktowners $250,000 a year. What I'm saying is that those figures aren't true, or not necessarily true, that it actually may be costing the town $250,000 to $300,000 a year on high-end salaries and shifting it over. Other issues, as an aside, are central garage. You're not going to have a central garage, not unless you change physical plant. So you have to have an investment in physical plant to do what you want to do in terms of central garage. So the problem is that the issue isn't as being presented. And the problem is, and I've people for the Citizens for DPW, I've always cautioned them. They said, you got to, you have to go slowly and tone down your rhetoric, because what you're going to do is end up fogging the issues. And then when you fog the issues far enough, nobody knows what they're doing anymore, what they're voting for. And so I don't think there's enough time to educate people as to what they are, because we don't even know what the full fallout of the issues are going to be should we do this.
Does a DPW have to be headed by an engineer?
No.
So Eric DiBartolo could head it.
You could appoint him, yeah.
You have, right now, a highway supervisor runs every 4 years.
Yeah.
And the town supervisor runs every 2 years.
Yeah.
If a DPW director were to be appointed by the town, isn't it conceivable that you could have a different DPW director every 2 years?
Yes.
The administrations keep changing?
Yeah. And the funny, but see, this is the other funny part about it, because you make a very good point. There are certain appointed positions that are, there's the town attorney, the town controller, there would be the DPW commissioner, which would be appointed. So you'd have to have at least 3 votes on the board to either remove them or appoint them. I wanted to take a look at the controller's position, all right, and we're still in the process of doing that. I got a lot of flack about doing that. Why are you doing it? Blah, blah, blah. Well, it's my prerogative as the new town supervisor to take a look at that. But what's remarkable about it is that somebody, if they get appointed in a position, do they become institutionalized and entrenched to the point where they're sacrosanct? And that becomes an issue. And then you have and it doesn't mean just because you have an appointed position that they don't fall into a dysfunction, which stems from the town board and maybe a divisive town board. And you get into the whole idea, well, now I'm going to, somebody wants to change the curtains in the building and wants to, do a facelift over here, and this is where they want to spend their money, and I got an appointed commissioner at DPW saying, well, we need drainage on Springhurst Street, and we need this culvert done, and we need the extra, blacktop over here, and this happens to be a 3-2 vote, and say, well, you're not getting that. And we don't want to hear about it, and we don't want you to bring it up because, I'm going to remind you, you know what, you're appointed. So we don't want to hear about that. So the thing is that there's some real value in having an independent voice. The argument is, well, you don't have that. The other department heads are headed up by appointed positions. Problem is that historically highways were everything in the town, and that used to drive the town, and that's why you had an elected highway superintendent, because that was most of the work of a town. Now we do all sorts of other things, planning, environmental stuff, sewer, water. So the highway functions have shrunk in proportion to whatever all the other expanded functions of town government have been over the years. Doesn't make what the highway superintendent is ballywick any more less important. Doesn't make it less important. It's still a vital part of town. 90% of my phone calls will come in have to do with blacktop. My road isn't done. I need this road done. Drainage over here. There's this type of vital infrastructure, which I always think of this level of government, that level of government where the tires hit the pavement. But you go one step further, that's the department where the tires really do hit the pavement, literally, and not just figuratively. So does the town lose, or is it a disservice to the town of Yorktown is not to have an independent voice in lobbying for, the allocation of resources towards that kind of vital infrastructure, when you may have a town board that decides that it doesn't want to do it? And I think if you look at the past experience, just very recent experience, is that discussion's been happening even with my board. We get CHIPS money, and that's the only investment that's been made in blacktopping any roads in the town of Yorktown for the last several years. So I got a highway superintendent who, asking us for general fund money to restart the paving program, bring it up to stuff. And if we sit there and say, well, you know what, we don't want to hear from you, and we don't want you to bring this up because we don't want to have to deal with that issue, keep your mouth shut. That's what you may have with an appointed guy. You got to goose step behind what the policymakers without going off the resereation, so to speak.
As an example, Mr. DiBartolo just recently came to you for $200,000, and
Right.
you authorized $100,000.
Right.
So do you consider that an effective set of checks and balances there in terms of the independent voice versus what the government how the board can control what the highway superintendent
I
does?
think, because what happens is everything else becomes a suggestion by a department head, because the department heads will do that as well. They'll say, well, I'm not looking for this kind of money for this type of thing. And you'll see, just as weeks go on, one of the issues that's going to come up is going to be the meter program, water meter program. But what you'll see is that there is that, and I don't think it's unnecessary. I don't think it's unhealthy to have that possible dissension and debate within the auspices of town government. So to me, there's a value in that. You can make very cogent arguments in the other direction. It's just, I don't, if the highway superintendent or whoever running highway has to answer to me, well, then the accountability will be with me the next time I run for office. If they don't like what I'm doing with the highway department, they'll get rid of me. So, but yeah, the putting that person necessarily under the power of the town board or the town supervisor, I don't know that it necessarily, in the long term, functions to provide the town of Yorktowners with the services that they're accustomed to. I don't, and I think you can go debating that until the cows come home.
Part of what citizens for DPW argue in the democracy debate over taking away the highway superintendent position is that it's generally an uncontested race. What are your impressions on that, and why do you feel that is?
It's funny. I can only, I only recently got involved in town politics, so to speak. But I find the argument a little bit humorous because I ran as an insurgent candidate. I was not endorsed by the Republicans. I was not endorsed by the Democrats. I ran a primary. I got involved this time around because I felt very strongly that the town was going in a terribly wrong direction if things haven't been done. And one of the things, which is apropos back to here, circle full back, is I don't think the town's made enough of an investment in its future planning because it's decimated that whole section of professionals, which I think is an absolute shame. And I would push to get that kind of professionals back, and then you could probably transition to a DPW. But all that aside, there are people out there that and I can rattle off a whole bunch of names of people that would be looking to and have run for highway superintendent, and that I think would be excellent at the job. But that's an issue for your local political parties and your political town committees. I think those committees may be sclerotic themselves in trying to find candidates, and so that's not, you can't blame the current highway superintendent that he runs unopposed all the time. If there are people and if the people are out there that they feel strongly enough about it, the issue is to get involved. But that is a reason to keep it as an elected position, because that's the beauty of this country. You can really have somebody that sits there and goes, you know what, I'm tired of sitting on my on my recliner and yelling at the TV. I'm going to go out and finally do something about it. And you actually can. There's an avenue. There's an opening. There's a possibility to do it. I think that's a beautiful thing about this country. And I think every time you diminish that or take away another area where the voters can express themselves, not only voters can express themselves, but somebody can say, I'm going to run for that position now because I'm going to bring my ideas to the table. I think every time you diminish that, it's a sad day. So somebody's quoted me, Grace is a 200-year tradition or something, or why doesn't he get over it? Times change. Look, I got to tell you, the country could, Mussolini got the trains running on time. I mean, there was no question about that. So, but is that what you wanted?
It's actually not true. It's an urban myth. It's an urban myth. He got the trains to run on time.
But you not understand the point. So I think you can debate those back and forth. The last bit of analysis that I presented you with it too was essentially, okay, you know what? Take the whether it's costing money or not costing money, put that aside. You can whether highway superintendent should be under your control or not under the town control, put that aside. Put aside what I may feel about it or not feel about it. Should I, nevertheless, the hue and cry is always, why not let us vote and let the voters decide? And I think that's those are the more challenging issues, because I think in the sense that the hue and cry is you're not being fair, you're not giving us our right to go to the polls on this, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, we have a representative democracy. I've got an obligation to vet all the issues that I put out for referendum. The fact that it's subject to mandatory referendum points to the profundity of what it is that you're looking to do, which is eliminate an elected position. So I think the thing has to be fully vetted, understand exactly what you're doing, where you're going. And the other problem I have at this point is that to try to re-educate the public as to what they are buying when this thing goes out onto referendum is a formidable task at this time, because there's been unrelenting campaign on the other side that has basically said, you know, it's $250,000 savings, to $250,000 savings, to $250,000 savings, and I don't think that's true. It's funny. It was Low HUD that had an opinion piece, I think Saturday or Sunday, Community Views letter to the editor about the Yorktown DPW, and I kind of chuckled because the picture the paper had in there was of 202, which is a state road, which is not even ours. But that's how I see it at this point. So
the other side, two major figures in the DPW movement are ex-supervisors,
Yeah.
Siegel and Bach. And then they either said 4 of the last 5 supervisors or 5 of the last 6, I don't remember.
Right.
But agree with them that we should go to a DPW. And you're saying, obviously you disagree with that right now, and you've said the reasons why. I guess a lot of people would be interested in knowing, sort of like when ex-presidents criticize the current president.
Right.
Why should they believe Michael Grace?
As opposed to them? Yeah. You see, now I'm going
And you guys all have the same experience, and you could argue they have more experience, they've been here longer. And some of that's unfair, but just, how would you?
No, it's an excellent question. As far as experience, I'll beg to differ, because one form or another, I was involved with this town and town government for 16 years. I'm very, as ex-town, yeah, so I have an intimate knowledge of how the town functioned in the past and how it's functioning now. And it's vastly different. From the 1995 study today, completely and utterly different. A whole different lineup. Again, you had 2 engineers, you had an outside engineer, a planner, an assistant planner. You had a whole different lineup, number one. Number 2, the lawyer comes out in me when they say, I got 5 supervisors that say that, ex-supervisors that say this. Well, and even the lay people know what hearsay evidence is. It's worthless. I can tell you what, if I come in here, I say, well, I got 10 supervisors that say, who are they? What did they say? What's the context of what they said? How was the context of what was presented? So anyone I don't personally hear from, I really don't care what somebody else tells me they have to say, because I find it as not credible, especially when it's presented in an argument that's presenting one side of the issue or the other side of the issue. It's hearsay, it's garbage, it doesn't make any difference to me.
Where does the rest of the town board stand on this?
I can't speak for them, you have to ask them, but when you go back to, if I look at Bach and I look at Siegel, there's no question that under the Siegel administration, there was friction between the highway superintendent and the supervisor's office. There's no secret about that. There's lawsuits still pending with the town and those two. So where does the dysfunction lie in the fact of that? Did that dysfunction lie in the elected highway superintendent, or did that dysfunction lie in the elected supervisor that was there? Your guess is as good as mine. But the thing is, then you had Bach, who had an issue with George E. Lewis. So if you wanted to go historically, the town's functioned very well and been served very well. I don't think anybody, even the proponents of the DPW, would suggest that the town isn't providing services in a professional, efficient manner at this point. Nobody suggested that. You did have political friction between the supervisors and the highway superintendents during the 10 years of Bach and Siegel administrations. And I would suggest that those are the anomalies and not the general rule. So I put little credence in that. Would you have had a friction between the Siegel administration and the highway superintendent if she could have appointed the highway superintendent rather than dealing with the highway superintendent that was elected? Maybe. Or maybe one of the points of the 1995 study is, what? If that DPW appointed position and the commissioner doesn't function well for some reason, you're not just going to affect the highway department. You're going to affect all services across the board, because everything is under that DPW at this point. The entire bureaucracy is under that DPW at this point. I think the 1995 report also made the suggestion that all this would be unnecessary if you had strong central control coming out of town hall. In other words, if you had a town board that functioned well and worked well with the department heads and the superintendent. So I think a lot of that is, I think.
You think you have that?
Well, my experience has been that when I don't get into the personal innuendos. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in what somebody else has to say about somebody. I'll decide for myself. I'm not relying on hearsay information. I treat my department heads as professionals, and given the way they presented themselves the other night, I don't think anybody can doubt they are really hardworking professionals. So at this point, it's been a good, healthy give and take. We don't always agree, but we all understand what the object of why we're here, and that is to move things along, provide those services, be responsive to our constituencies, and it's worked fairly well.
Councilman Paganelli recently raised the issue that the town supervisor's position, the length of term is too short, in that in the first year you're learning the job, and in the second year you're campaigning for re-election.
Yeah.
Given that, are you concerned about the political ramifications of possibly not putting up this referendum and having that be a reflection, perhaps seen as a negative reflection by the voters for your re-election?
You know what? I'll take my political lumps if they're going to come my way in terms of that. The thing is, I can't act, without conviction, because I'm worried about how that's going to translate in the next election cycle. One of the things I think, if I want to blow my horn, is a lot of the criticisms of the DPW or the things that they think that need to be fixed are things that we're moving on anyhow. So we've instituted a lot of things that will provide efficiencies. We've got a new fuel management system. We're going to get a fleet management software system, which is going to which will then allow us to act like a central garage without having to change physical plant. We've incorporated and brought in new procurement policy software, we've actually eliminated one part-time position at this point because we don't need it because our software is now providing those services. So we're also looking at digitizing our all our records, so our record management will change, and we'll have integration between all the different offices as well.
Are you exceeding industry standards in that, or?
No, I think we've lagged behind, but
you're catching up.
Yeah, and I think what's happening is that I think this is unfortunate. I think the DPW discussion, although a healthy one, is an unfortunate distraction to a lot of things that are being accomplished. We are digitizing. We use microfiche here, and not only so I get somebody come up. I get the building department says you got 8 boxes of stuff that he wants to put on microfiche, and I'm like, you're kidding me, right? I mean, I don't, microfiche doesn't seem to be in the vocabulary anymore, but. The idea is that so we were going to spend money microfiching. I said, no, we're not. We're going to start to digitize stuff, and we're going to start to digitize and build a digital database. So that there was an idea at one time. Well, let's put planning, buildings, I don't know, and engineering all under one roof, and you have one window, and you have one-stop shopping at one point. It isn't. Guys don't. That's not the issue. It's you don't need. I don't need. If I want to. I either digitize stuff and start to move into that direction, or I put a new wing on Town Hall to store the microfiche machines and everybody else so they can all look at the same file so they don't have to run. No, if I digitize it. So we're moving in a lot in those directions. Those are the investments that are really worthwhile. And when people tell me, we need a DPW to bring Yorktown to the 21st century, that's not the issue. It's not the issue. We need to make the investment in a technology that will allow us to do the information sharing virtually without having to. So that's one thing. So we're moving towards all those things. And the other things that we have to do, I feel very strongly about moving towards investment in visionary professionals to work for the town. And I think if we decide to make that investment, do you want those visionary professionals to do double duty to start to spill over into the operational aspects of the town? Now you begin to talk about the framework of a DPW. Now you talk about killing two birds with one stone. Now you talk about getting a return on your investment and bringing down the costs of what a transition to a DPW would otherwise be.
Yeah, we do have to start to wrap it up. I got the high sign from one of the producers that. Any final thoughts from any of our?
I have one last question. You haven't met with the board, all the board members yet, I don't believe, since the DPW meeting.
Right.
So you probably don't know whether you're going to, well, maybe you do. Do you plan to vote on this anyway, the DP thing? You'd be a no vote?
Yeah, I don't know where the board's. I feel strongly that I at least have to. I have to let the town of Yorktown know where I stand.
Which is no.
Which I think I have to. I think whether the other board's members feel obligated to do that or not, I don't know. I certainly can't make a collective statement on behalf of the board. Right. But I think the unfortunate aspect of this debate has been the way it's been prefaced, and had that not been the case, I think we could have a real discussion about it. But I think the shrill rhetoric on the DPW end that we have to eliminate elected positions to save money, not true. There's no connection there. And the thing is, if that's what's going out to referendum, that's a big mistake. And it's ill-defined, it's misleading, and if we passed it this November, which I don't know whether it would, but if it does, then come 2014, you're looking, when we come back and say, now we're going to implement this thing and it's going to cost you $250,000, there may be a lot of voter remorse at that point, plus a little angry voters that say they were misled. So I think you go slowly on this. I think I love discussing innovative approaches towards any problems that we do, and I welcome the continued debate on it. I think at this point it's too ill-defined and premature to do it, and I think that we'll continue the debate. But there are a lot of other once a lot of these other initiatives take place, a lot of the things that we're pushing, and those get into place, you'll have a better idea of the functionality of the town anyhow, how it functions and where it can function and where it needs to be. Where deficiencies in management need to be addressed, and at that point, whether that's best addressed by DPW or not, or a non-elected highway superintendent.
Okay. Well, on behalf of the supervisor, we want to thank, working from this end this time, Brian Fumagalli of Yorktown News, Mike Daly of the Northern Westchester Examiner, and Robert Marchant of the Journal News. And thanks for being with us. And as Supervisor Grace has said, we're going to try to do this on an occasional basis.
Anytime you guys want to, we'll do it when you want. This happens to be once. Unfortunately, we just got bogged down in a singular issue, but it'd be interesting to do it on anything. So, I really appreciate you guys coming up and spending the time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for watching us. Be sure to catch Grace Notes with Yorktown Supervisor Michael Grace next time and every time. I'm your host, Bruce Saper of Chase Media Group, because Yorktown is your town. Thank you.